Hi, I'm Marshall Brown. Welcome back to Water Matters. There's probably no one on Long Island more identified with water issues than Kevin McAllister. Outspoken and passionate, Kevin held the position of Peconic Baykeeper for 16 years before launching his own organization, Defend H2O, a few years ago. Kevin has degrees in Natural Resources Conservation and Marine Biology and a Master's of Science degree in Coastal Zone Management. Kevin pulls no punches in his effort to protect Long Island's water, which has earned him the respect of his peers and the wrath of his opponents. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin McAllister.
Thank you, Marshall. I'm honored to be a guest today. My name is Kevin McAllister. I'm founding president of Defend H2O, which is an environmental advocacy organization. Our focus is on clean water, both drinking water, surface water, habitat, and in particular, coastal resiliency. The health of our bays is reliant, of course, on water quality, but part of that equation really is natural shorelines. If we lose the integrity of natural shorelines, we'll see a precipitous decline in basically life support for that system. My experience runs deep. I hold undergraduate degrees in natural resources, marine biology, and I have a Master's of Science in Coastal Zone Management, roughly 30 years of experience working in government, consultancy, and more recently in the nonprofit sector, which serves me well. As a scientist, I'm able to really speak truth to power often to educate elected officials and the community at large on the threats to our waters and our coastline. A big issue that I've been addressing really as a former Peconic Baykeeper and in my current role is Suffolk County's vector control program. This is their mosquito control program. It dates back many years, decades. I became involved roughly in 2001 after the appearance of West Nile in New York City, where there were really no holds barred on the pesticide applications within the city. Groups had actually sprung up in opposing the pesticides. My commentary to the Suffolk County Legislature at that time was urging them not to escalate their program. They have an annual program that undergoes review every year. It essentially has several components: water management, the larvicide spraying. So these are chemicals or pesticides that are designed to knock back mosquito larvae in the water column. Then they move into the adult spraying in the prime time of the summer months. And lastly is their surveillance and monitoring of mosquito breeding sites. I do take issue with certainly their water management components. I was instrumental some years back to stop the redredging of 660 linear miles of ditches that crisscross 20 to 30,000 acres in Suffolk County. These were depression area ditches for the purpose of draining off the marshes, so they would control mosquito breeding. Unfortunately, these are also conveyances for stormwater runoff and groundwater seepage areas that we now know relative to nitrogen and bacterial levels are a big problem in our waters. So this is a straight shot, and thank goodness the state did not issue a permit allowing them to reopen these systems. On the larva side, The big issue that we've been addressing, and it's I'll say a large community that is concerned about the application of methoprene. This is an insect growth regulator, classified as a larvicide. The intent is to generally spray it by helicopter. That's how it's normally deployed. Again, over 20,000+ acres of wetlands, roughly every 2 weeks on the tidal cycles. It's intended to get into the water column. It's taken up by the mosquito larvae, and essentially it disrupts their development into the adult stage. Unfortunately, the science is quite clear on methoprene. Material safety data sheet recognizes that it's highly toxic to some form of estuarine and freshwater invertebrates. And when we get into the basically the animal kingdom, insectia and crustacea, or lobsters, crabs, and shrimp, they are in a larger family of arthropods. So my point is the effectiveness of methoprene on mosquito larvae or insects holds true in the crustacea world as well. And relative to productivity in these marshes, these are bread baskets of the estuary. So if we're knocking back populations, whether it be a copepod or a grass shrimp, in reproductive cycles where the numbers are just not there, over the long term, we're going to have an adverse impact on productivity. Again, the means of deployment is by helicopter. That's basically as mowing a lawn back and forth across the marsh surface, is lower than 50 feet. So this chemical, of course, is getting into that water column. The studies are rigorous. The science is quite sound, and I've reviewed probably 20 or 30 peer-reviewed scientific papers that really speak to damming impacts to non-target insects. So, we have clear science. Unfortunately, Suffolk County has dismissed that science because, again, this program is principally driven for nuisance control. So we are spraying these expansive marshes because of the surrounding communities and the resistance to mosquito breeding in these areas. The state of Connecticut in 2013 banned methoprene in all coastal areas. So if there is any likelihood of drainage into Long Island Sound, this product could not be used. And to date, I've seen no objections to that ban. Maine tried to follow suit with a ban a couple of years ago. They were unsuccessful. New York City, after the appearance of West Nile, actually in their environmental impact study, found that methoprene was too high of risk in Jamaica Bay and had banned its use around, again, within the drainage areas. So it's significant. Again, because of the interest on Suffolk County really suppress mosquito breeding, and I would argue that it's too high of a risk to be deploying methoprene. We have to cease and desist. I've worked closely with Connecticut to help advance that measure a couple of years ago. Senator Christopher Murphy from Connecticut had communicated to our Governor Cuomo asking New York State to follow suit. And to date, there really has not been a response. So it's lying dormant, I think largely because of the political influences around the mosquito spraying. The demand is there, unfortunately. And I should point out, relative to these spraying events, the criteria for deploying aerial application is based on the number of phone calls that are complaints. More recently, there was an application in the Massac area, and unfortunately, it was reported that dragonflies had basically were no longer existent after this methoprene application. And again, it's anecdotal information, but it begs the question, what are we doing to the aquatic environment?
Everyone wants a nice-looking lawn, and everyone wants clean water to drink and safe water for swimming, boating, and fishing. But chemical pesticides and high-nitrogen fertilizers are contaminating our drinking water and contributing to fish kills and algal blooms in our bays, rivers, and streams. The good news is you can have a great-looking lawn without those harmful products. Most garden centers carry non-toxic lawn products, and many of Long Island's top landscape contractors offer natural lawn care services that make your property look great and protect our water at the same time. So, if you love Long Island, join the campaign to keep our waters clean. Go to ilovelongisland.org, take the pledge, get your lawn sign, and show your neighbors you care about the health and safety of the place we call home. ilovelongisland.org.
This is Jack. Jack and his family live in a nice house on Long Island. Jack has a beautiful green lawn, and he's very proud of it. Every spring, Jack goes to the garden store to buy fertilizer and weed killer for his lawn. He wants it to look as good as possible. Jack loves living on Long Island, and like everyone else, he wants his family to have clean water to drink and to swim in. Jack also likes to fish, and hates it when algae blooms and dead fish ruin his fun. This is Jim. Jim lives next door to Jack. He also has a beautiful green lawn, and he's very proud of it. Every spring, Jim goes to the garden store to buy fertilizer for his lawn. He uses a low-nitrogen, slow-release fertilizer and leaves the grass clippings on the lawn. He uses compost and grass seed instead of weed killer, and his lawn is thick and beautiful. One day, Jim told Jack how high-nitrogen fertilizers can help create algae blooms and fish kills, and that lawn pesticides are polluting our drinking water. Jack was amazed. He'd never thought about it before. This spring, Jim has a bright blue lawn sign on his yard that says, "I love Long Island. No pesticides or high-nitrogen fertilizers are used on this property." And right next door, his neighbor Jack proudly displays the same bright blue sign. If you love Long Island, join the campaign to protect our water by eliminating high-nitrogen fertilizers and chemical pesticides. For more information, visit ilovelongisland.org.
Welcome back to Water Matters, and my guest, Kevin McAllister. Kevin, after hearing that, once again, I feel a lot of outrage when it comes to vector control. How do we get the public to understand how much harm we're doing to the marshes?
Well, it's a constant drumbeat, if you will, and groups like yours to get the word out. We have to keep the issue alive, keep bringing it forward to the public at large, and I hope we reach a critical mass where there's enough opposition, and people will actually show up and register opposition to our elected officials. So when these annual work plans come up for review in, say, November, December, that we give them reason for pause, and ultimately methoprene is excised from the, hopefully the 2018 work plan.
Those sprays earlier this year, the dead crabs and the dead dragonflies. We're killing our marshes to kill mosquitoes.
That's been the priority, and with respect to their water management activities, and they call it integrated marsh management. When you really read the documents closely, and again, my I guess longevity on the issue, I really understand the nuances to it. What is always driving their program is mosquito control, mosquito reduction. And the two aren't necessarily compatible. So to go in these wetlands and carve out ponds, to remove these depressional areas that are hot spot for breeders, potentially we're having an impact on marsh ecology, not to mention the resiliency of these marshes to absorb floodwaters in storm events.
The larger pictures over the last 35 years or so, we've lost about 45% of the insects globally. We're wiping out the insects, which leads to all sorts of problems within the food web, obviously. Long Island alone, 5 million pounds of pesticides on Long Island every year.
I don't know if the term's kind of a suburban mentality, but in the last probably 30 years, we've become very accepting of, I refer to them as the trophy lawns, and thriving for those trophy lawns, and accepting of routine pesticide applications. And when you compound that by 1,000-fold or greater, of course, I'm talking in a neighborhood, there's real impacts on the nearby marsh system or water quality in the Great South Bay.
There is some hope in this last legislative session that maybe this time the county wouldn't reauthorize, given what we know. But we sat there, and one of the legislators said, well, I really don't want my grandkids to be covered with welts when they come visit me. That is the driver behind this. It's not disease control. It's not, West Nile, which is a freshwater mosquito that's a weak flyer.
Right.
It's so that people aren't doing this all summer.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a disconnect to the natural environment where we aren't prioritizing that over, again, just comfort within neighborhoods. And you're absolutely right. And, beyond the welts was the notion that, disease can set in with West Nile virus. And, there's...
And the county hasn't really done a good job of pointing out where the real threat is for West Nile. It's in your gutters, it's in your bird baths, it's in whatever standing water on your property.
Yeah, education is absolutely wanting, and they need to do a better job. But until they recalibrate, what their agenda is, meaning we got to stop these pesticide applications for nuisance control, then we're going to continue down this road.
And it's also incredibly self-defeating there. One could argue that the best mosquito control is a healthy marsh. You got your dragonflies, you got your fish fry, you got other insects. Just taking the mosquito larvae out of the food chain already is bad for all those creatures. But I'll tell you a little anecdote. I was down in South Carolina on a marsh. Got towards dusk. We were eating out in the veranda. We were getting eaten alive. And the server said, well, we can move you inside, but just wait a couple minutes. Up came the dragonflies. It was like the helicopters in an apocalypse now coming over the hill. And then the bats came. And that was it. That 10-minute window towards dusk is when the mosquitoes first come up. I was astounded. And then to think that we're killing off all the predators to the mosquitoes, leaving the marshes depleted, and then making the situation even worse. I mean, if you were king, how would you control mosquitoes on Long Island?
Well, marsh restoration, of course, functioning marshes, and I'm not talking about some of the prescriptions that Suffolk County is looking to engage in. I think there's got to be just a level of tolerance, and applying some, say, backyard techniques, garlic spray around vegetation, the mosquito traps,
magnets,
the magnets. Thank you, and to give some comfort level in a backyard barbecue on your deck, as opposed to the wholesale elimination of mosquitoes, because that's a losing prospect. And again, the collateral impacts are substantial, and we will rue the day that we haven't figured this out.
Well, I remember long enough what summer nights were growing up here. The noise of the insects. I saw a lot more birds back then too, and so we need to revitalize our ecosystems on Long Island if we want to have a future here.
And Marshall, I'll say this, while there's a great deal of focus on nitrogen pollution from septics, and we're finally starting to really apply ourselves, meaning government and the community, to correcting that problem. To ignore wholesale pesticide applications in functioning tidal marshes, something's wrong with that. It's significant, and unless we back off of products like methoprene and eliminate it, as Connecticut has done, then we're not going to solve the problem. There's always going to be a infliction on the ecology and the health of these bays.
And there's money involved there too. What happened to the lobster harvests in the Sound, for instance?
And that was principally, and I'll acknowledge the science doesn't have a smoking gun per se with the lobster die-off, and I do believe it's has to do with water temps and climate change. But nevertheless, after due diligence on the part of Connecticut's legislature, they arrived at a decision that methoprene was too high of a risk for their interests, Long Island Sound Health, and banned the product in 2013.
Well, we know that spraying happens every 2 weeks during the summer on Long Island. You mentioned it has to do with the lunar cycles.
Right, when the floodwaters are in the marsh. So they're deploying methoprene and BTI when the marshes are flooded. So that's the intent, to get it into the water column.
So what do you do as a Long Island resident to A, find out when there's going to be spraying, and B, reaching out to the county and saying, no, we don't want this here, especially if there's methoprene involved?
Well, I think it's incumbent that, basically the larger community educate themselves, and, we're resources, our groups are, to provide that information and have some level of commitment to really become active in stopping methoprene spraying. And again, as the county reviews their annual work plans, October into November, perhaps even December, that's when we need people to register opposition to their, representatives, their legislators, and to actually show up in Hauppauge and take 3 minutes to express concern. And, I think then we'll move our elected officials to recognize that, the opposition is greater than the support for pesticide applications.
It's so frustrating because there's so much science being applied to our water quality issues otherwise, and somehow this is something where we're all supposed to pretend that this is a public health issue when it's really not.
No, and Suffolk County, and this really was in response to a lawsuit that I had filed where there was inadequate environmental review. Well, be careful what you wish for. The county spent $5 million on a ginned up environmental impact statement to suggest that products like methoprene were no harm, no foul. And I had pointed out at the time they overlooked 20 peer-reviewed studies that spoke to some impacts, some collateral damages to methoprene use. So they've cooked the science books to support their contention that what they use is basically harmless, and that's just not true.
Yeah, when that vote went down at the county legislature, and they were approved for funding for the coming year, the vector spray people really dodged a bullet there. And this is about bureaucratic survival as much as anything else.
Oh, absolutely. It's a $3 million a year budget, at least it was. And there's jobs, there's contracts, helicopter company, the pesticide manufacturers. There's a web here that doesn't meet the eye, and they're driven to keep this program intact, particularly the wintertime work, which again can be quite impactive in these marshes. I will tell you, back in 2001, they went out to Napeague in East Hampton. They spent 2 weeks out there with heavy equipment redredging ditches, with a bombardier, they call it. I call it the Grim Reaper. There were spotted turtles and diamondback terrapins that were overwintering, that were macerated. And I've had vector control people tell me these stories.
It's just horrendous. So they're just chewing up all these hibernating turtles with their machinery, and probably laughing all the way. It's outrageous. Is there anything that these people could do other than spray? Let's say spraying is banned. Is there anything that could be any way that could be redeployed towards marsh restoration?
Yes, I mean, when there's legitimate marshes that need restoration, and I have pointed out some of these, the county doesn't seem interested in legitimate restoration. It's always driven again by mosquito control. I've seen the marshes that were highly functional, but yet because they were breeders, the prescription to pond builds in these marshes was drawn up, and that's misguided. Again, with a viable functioning system, there are natural checks and balances, but at the end of the day, we've got to accept, some nuisance around neighborhoods that abut saltwater marshes.
That's how I grew up.
And the
covered with mosquito bites.
And a challenge to the county, let's stop methoprene for a couple of years and really see the level of concern, I guess, from the public. Whether or not we've unleashed an unbearable situation with nuisance. But I don't think that would be the case. But nevertheless, they won't agree to that. They won't support it. And I think the community is going to have to really push hard to move our legislators to excise methoprene from the annual work plans.
Give me one marsh. Get the community around that one marsh to say no, and I think that's how the dominoes can start to fall.
Yes, and that's a good test case. And further east, the county has suggested, we won't spray a section of the marsh. That's flawed science. It's not going to have the results to tell us what the answer or questions are. What are the questions? I think it's just a facade to placate some of the opposition in hopes that we go away, and we're not going away. This movement is building. Groups like yours, keeping the issue alive and front and center. Ultimately, I think we will prevail, and I think the common sense to keep this poison out of the marshes will eventually happen here.
And ironically, we'd have less mosquitoes if we did that.
Yes, and so I think we've got to continue to be tenacious advocates on this issue, continue to educate our elected officials, and hopefully they'll get the message from their constituency that they're prioritizing bay health over, again, nuisance control.
Well, I propose this to you. Let's pick a marsh. Let's pick a community with a marsh where they would understand why there shouldn't be spraying.
Agreed. So good.
Very good.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for coming all this way. It's such a hot day.
I'm glad. It's good.
Yeah.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Water Matters. Thanks to my guests, Kevin McAllister, and all of you who have tuned in to watch the show today, because here on Long Island, water matters.